From the Broadcast Center at BCIT's Burnaby campus, this is All Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Good afternoon, Burnaby. My name is David Nadalini, and you're listening to 1680 The Crow's news update to 12 o'clock. Here are the latest stories. A coach for the Vancouver Whitecaps has pleaded guilty to 4 sexual offenses. Bob Berarda entered guilty pleas to 3 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of sexual touching. He made a video appearance today before a BC provincial court in North Vancouver. Berarda was charged in December 2020 with 6 counts of sexual exploitation. He was also charged with 2 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of child luring. Multiple women who were a part of Canada's under-20 talent pool from 2008 came forward to accuse Berarda of acting inappropriately with team members. Berarda was dismissed by both the Whitecaps and Canada Soccer in October 2008. The NDP planned to announce the party's political agenda in a new throne speech to the Legislative Assembly. This speech represents a new legislative session for the House. Premier John Horgan, who recently underwent treatment for throat cancer, will be among the returning politicians. In 2 weeks, the government will unveil its budget, which will account for last fall's floods and mudslides in southern BC. Newly elected Liberal leader Kevin Falcon is set to run in the Vancouver Quilition by-election. Falcon says former leader Andrew Wilkinson will be giving up his seat so he can partake. Shirley Bond will continue to perform leadership duties in the House while Falcon focuses on the election. A fire in Langley burned down a barn early last night. The owner of the barn was inside when the fire started and was alerted when they smelled smoke. The owner rushed out of the barn and proceeded to call 911. Firefighters responded to the blaze shortly after and were able to get the fire under control. Fire crews suggested there were no working smoke alarms or sprinklers to alert the owner before the blaze overtook the building. The owner is uninjured and the cause of the fire is currently being investigated. The Surrey RCMP is warning the public about the rise of grandson scams that target vulnerable seniors. In January, they received 10 complaints of fraud related to grandson scams. 3 of the 10 seniors fell victim to the scam and lost a total of $139,000. These scams involve a suspect calling a senior citizen pretending to be police, lawyers, or direct relatives. The suspect tells them that their grandson has been arrested and requires bail money. The RCMP says that people should speak with their senior family members and educate them about this and other types of scams. Next week, Saskatchewan will be removing all COVID-19 restrictions and health mandates. Starting Monday, residents will no longer need vaccine passports to enter businesses, and indoor mask mandates will be lifted. Premier Scott Moe says that while these restrictions have been effective, they have finally run their course.
So it's time for us to take a step back in living with COVID and to make every effort to get our lives back to normal. It's time for us also to heal the divisions in our communities over vaccination. Those divisions are in our families, they're in our communities, but they are across our province and they're across this nation.
Moe says the passport has created deep divisions in the province that need to be healed. Saskatchewan is the first province to announce plans to lift all COVID-19 restrictions. Quebec Liberal MP Joel Lightbound is breaking ranks with his party on COVID-19. He says it's time his government stops dividing Canadians on the issue. Lightbound says both the tone and the policies of the Liberal government changed on the eve of the last election.
From a positive and unifying approach, a decision was made to wedge, to divide, and to stigmatize. I fear that this politicization of the pandemic risks undermining the public's trust in our public health institutions. This is not a risk we ought to be taking lightly.
Lightbound says while he is the only MP to speak out so far, there are others in the party who feel the same. A Minneapolis police officer is testifying against the officers involved in George Floyd's death. Officer Nicole McKenzie says that the officers who oversaw Floyd's rights and needs were trained in emergency medical response. This means that they could identify if a victim had a pulse and offer CPR. J. Alexander Kung, Thomas Lane, and Tao Thao are accused of depriving Floyd of his rights when they failed to give him medical aid. Officer Derek Chauvin knelt on Floyd's neck for close to 10 minutes. The Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences has announced this year's Oscar nominees. The nominations for the 94th Academy Awards were announced this morning by actors Tracy Ellis Ross and Leslie Jordan. Canadian filmmaker Denis Villeneuve has received an Oscar nomination for adapting the sci-fi epic Dune. Here's a clip.
What if I'm not dead? You'll still be the only thing I ever needed you to be. Come on! My son.
Dune will compete in several categories, including Best Adapted Screenplay. Other top contenders are Kenneth Branagh's black and white coming-of-age drama Belfast and Jane Campion's gothic western The Power of the Dog. The Oscars will be held on March 27th. The Canucks are going up against the Arizona Coyotes tonight. Louis Eriksson will be back in the Rogers Arena for the first time. Eriksson previously played with Vancouver Canucks and was a fan favorite. He now plays for the Arizona Coyotes after being traded last year. Players will hit the ice tonight at 7. Personal trainers have been greatly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, with provincial rules and regulations constantly changing. Our reporter Joshua Rice has more on the story.
The first few months of a new year are usually when personal trainers are at their busiest due to New Year's resolutions and fitness goals. But with the gym closures over the holidays, many missed out on their greatest revenue period of the year. Fitness manager and personal trainer Mike Megla says that although some clients wanted at-home workout plans, his gym had to freeze the majority of their personal training agreements.
Especially from the perspective of a managerial position, it has a huge impact on the revenue of the club, and it becomes harder and harder to stay open when there's those big interruptions in our revenue.
Current regulations are allowing for gyms to operate at a reduced capacity, with masks once again being mandated. I'm Joshua Rice with 1680 The Crow.
Last weekend, curling clubs from across the nation celebrated Curling Day in Canada. Our reporter Braden Ursel has more on the story.
The Winter Olympic stage has the biggest spotlight in all of sports, and its very high profile has brought a flock of new curlers to the sport. For the city of Kelowna, the turnout was better than expected.
We had over 100. I don't know the exact count at the end, but we had over 100. We had people phoning us to get in because we were sold out online, and we squeezed a few more in at the end.
The general manager, Jock Tyre, says everyone was very happy to get out and do something together with their families during the pandemic, and that the club plans to host another open event to the public before the end of the curling season. Braden Ursel, 1680 The Crow.
A sporting goods store owner says that the pandemic caused a 50% decrease in business activity. Our reporter Mohammed Hussein tells us more.
Ben Ludwig is the co-owner of sports goods store The Sports Exchange in Vancouver. Most of his products cater towards hockey players and baseball players from age 6 to 50 years old. With fluctuations in COVID restrictions not allowing many sports leagues to operate consistently, his business struggled.
We basically went from a $2.5-3 million business to half of that because, the city didn't issue permits, so no one could play sports. The rinks were closed, and everyone was, stuck at home.
Another issue Ludwig and his business partners are facing is the supply chain. He said that April is usually the second busiest month of the year, but this year he thinks they will be short in inventory. Mohammed Hussein, 1680 The Crow.
I'm joined by Mohammed now for more on the story. Hey, Mohammed.
Hey, David.
What's next for Ludwig and the rest of his business?
David, Ludwig is hopeful that this downwards trajectory of the virus can hopefully carry into the summer, but he also talked about how it's hard to know given the unpredictability of the pandemic thus far. He said that at this point he hopes to shift his focus less about recovering from the pandemic and more about towards moving on from the pandemic and trying to get better each and every single day.
Okay, all right. And I'm also really curious, are there any current restrictions on playing sports?
Well, David, most sports activities are now back and running. The province actually recently announced that the ban on youth school sports has been lifted. However, adult sports programs still must only occupy at 50% capacity for whichever venue they are participating in, and adult sports tournaments with more than 3 teams competing against each other are still banned. Back to you, David.
All right, thanks, Mohammed. Officials of the Beijing Olympics are inviting more spectators to attend the Winter Games. They say that COVID-19 exposures are under control and within the closed-loop bubble. This bubble separates all event personnel from the public. Spectators will be separated from athletes in the closed loop by going in and out through spectator gates and sitting in designated areas. In weather today, it's overcast with some rain, with heavier rains expected later tonight. It is currently 5 degrees with a high of 7 and a low of 4. And that was your news update to 12 o'clock. My name is David Nadalini, and you're listening to 1680 The Crow. Have a good one, Burnaby.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.